After years of brewing tensions, war finally broke out between the UN and the Martian Congressional Republic following several skirmishes over Ganymede. Today we're going to take a closer look at the larger UN-MCR War. The United Nations and the Martian Congressional Republic had been at odds with one another for decades over the control of the system, particularly control of crucial resources in the outer planets, and many viewed a war between both factions as inevitable. So when the war finally broke out following a skirmish over Ganymede, many were honestly relieved. The war began with a skirmish over Ganymede involving a protogen-protomolecule hybrid that was misidentified by both sides as an enemy combatant. This resulted in a clash between the UN's Jupiter fleet and the Martian Jupiter fleet over Ganymede, which ended up destroying many of the agricultural facilities on the surface of that moon. However, the first engagement did end with an MCRN victory, with the UNN forces being driven away from Ganymede, only to muster and carry out a second assault at the formal declaration of war. With the formal declaration of war, skirmishes likely broke out all across the system. However, the only one we are certain of is the skirmish over Ganymede, as well as a few other skirmishes within the Jupiter system. Seeing the conflict quickly growing in scale, UN leadership feared a potential Martian first strike, particularly one using nuclear weapons, planet-buster nuclear weapons that could devastate the surface of the Earth. It was then that a decision was made by UN Strategic Command to attempt to neutralize these weapons before they could be used. A series of precision railgun strikes were carried out in an effort to destroy Martian stealth platforms, of which there were 5. Of the 5, all 5 were destroyed, but one of them did manage to fire off a strategic missile before it was destroyed, and one of the nuclear warheads from that strategic missile did manage to make impact in South America, killing 2 million. However, with the neutralization of Mars's stealth strategic platforms, the risk of a strategic nuclear exchange was significantly reduced. With that out of the table, fighting focused on the outer planets, mainly centered around Jupiter's moons and the moons of Saturn. With both forces taking significant losses, the UNN was suffering harder hits, with their original 5-to-1 ratio eventually dropping to a 3-to-1 advantage. With the conclusions of battles around Saturn, both UN and Martian fleets began converging on the crucial Martian shipyard on Callisto, one of the most important strategic locations for the MCRN in the entire system outside of Mars. The idea was that a very large battle, likely the final battle of the war, would occur here and decide the fate of the conflict. Ultimately, the UN was able to muster over 50 ships, while the Martians were fielding about 25. This engagement was slated to be one of the last major engagements of the war. However, things didn't quite play out that way, after the UNN Agatha King was rerouted to go to Io. With their curiosity piqued by the rerouting of the UN flagship, the Martians dispatched a Scirocco-class cruiser, the MCRN Hammurabi, to intercept the Agatha King. With this peculiar series of maneuvers, both fleets called off their approach on Callisto and began making their way towards Io, and it seemed like the final battle of the war, instead of taking place at the major Martian shipyard on Callisto, would take place above the abandoned moon of Io that served very little strategic importance. However, it's around this time that a mutiny on board the Agatha King shook things up. This successful mutiny briefly took control of the bridge and was able to transmit information to the rest of the UN fleet that confirmed that Secretary Ehrenreich was behind staging the events that led to the war. This resulted in infighting among the UNN fleet and UNN vessels firing upon each other. In the confusion, Martian vessels held back and eventually offered a ceasefire to any UN forces that were willing to accept. The end result was that UNN forces were significantly damaged by this engagement, most notably with the Agatha King being left in complete ruin and eventually vaporized to prevent the spread of protomolecule. With the conclusion of this engagement and the ceasefire accepted by both Jupiter fleets, the UNN's Jupiter fleet and the MCRN Jupiter fleet, the fighting in the conflict came to a close, and now with the information in the open that Secretary Ehrenreich of the UN was responsible for the conflict, the war was quickly brought to a conclusion with an armistice signed by both sides. Ultimately, the conflict ended with what was essentially a stalemate. However, it could be argued that the real victors of the war were the OPA. In the confusion caused by the infighting between the two inner powers, the OPA were actually able to form a formal government and a formal navy, which was present during the events that would follow the end of the war. Still, the UN-MCR War is one of the largest conflicts within the universe of the Expanse, at least that we've seen in the TV show. And even with that said, we still only know of a handful of battles that occurred during the conflict. If you'd like to learn about one of these battles, the one that started it all, the showdown over Ganymede, I'll leave a link in the upper right-hand corner to my battle analysis on that engagement. And if you have any other engagements you'd like to see covered in future episodes of Battle Analysis and added to the archive, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.